Good afternoon. My name is Michael Evans. I'm head of U.S. operations, and my co-presenter is Vikas Dubey. He's the CEO of Annova Solutions. We've been in the industry for a combined 40 plus years.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. Annova Solutions has been doing record retrieval for a long time, mostly as a back-end partner for some of the big guys. So we have seen all kind of retrievals, Medicare Advantage, Medicaid, RADV audits, HEDIS, you name it, and there's a very good chance we have done this before. So when you're preparing for this webinar, we asked ourselves, why not talk about record retrieval?
You know, in the RA world, most conversations focus on chart review, coding accuracy, model changes, RADV readiness. All of that is critical. But nearly all the attention comes after a step. Most treat as a commodity, getting the chart in the door. In the next 45 minutes, we will focus on understanding what makes or breaks a retrieval project and how to avoid mistakes, leading to much better outcomes.
First of all, let's set the context. Let's take a hypothetical 200,000 MA plan. And let's say they decide to go for 30% chase, right? So which gives us 60,000 charts. Now, even a 5 percentage point gaps in the 60,000 charts, let's say you come down from 75 to 70 or come down from 85 to 80, that leaves you with 3,000 charts. Now let's get into dollar details. Let's assume 1.5 SCCs per chart. That's not too much, not too little. That gives you 4,500 missing SCCs. Now, even if I take average RAF weight of, let's say, 0.12, that means a 0.18 RAF deficit per affected member. And if I have, let's say, a moderate figure of $1,093 for a gap of 0.1 RAF score, we are talking about $1,967 lost revenue per missing member. And if you multiply this by 3,000 members, what this number is, this is $5.9 million, right? And if I do a bit of sensitive analysis, let's say you're better than that, you have only 3 percentage point gaps, that's still $3 million plus. And if you're worse, 7 point gap, you're talking about more than $8 million. Now, every plan in this room sits somewhere on the curve. The only question is, do you know what that gap is? And are you aware of the dollar gap? Michael. Yeah. So basically, last year what happened was a plan approached us and said, we have been chosen for a RADV audit, and they wanted our help in trying to retrieve charts. If you think of it, whether it's a RADV audit, risk adjustment program, quality, or audit, all of this really starts with the record retrieval. You cannot code what you don't have. Honestly speaking, retrieval is where either the whole risk adjustment program holds or it breaks quietly. And when it breaks one chart at a time. A SCC which is not reported, and the revenue loss which never gets noticed. Let's talk about the most common mistakes I've seen. Referring to retrieval as a call center or as a field center operation, field agent operations. Now it's both of this, don't get me wrong, but it's much more than that. Retrieval really is, to me, is a dynamic, multi-dimensional data metric, and it has to be approached as a program architecture problem. A program architecture with 5 very critical tracks. Number 1, inconsistent data. 2, broken processes. 3rd is just the nature of ecosystem. There's not much you can do about it. 4th is going to be transparency, dashboards, systems. And finally, the execution. We have to recognize each of these 5 tracks in isolation and in relation to each other. The key is to be aware of data gaps and design a process which accounts for these data gaps and has dashboards built in which are going to report these gaps at the right time. Think of a very simple problem. Let's say missing provider number. If you figure that in the start of the process, That's just a database lookup, doesn't hurt you much. But if you figure that data gap or wrong number in a 7th or 8th week in a 10-week cycle, you're in trouble. There's a very high chance the chart will either not come or it will come late, which is equally bad. The thing is, the discipline has to be front loaded. Every retrieval problem, the later you solve it, the more expensive it is going to be you. We have seen in our experience that programs that are essentially reactive in nature are always playing catch up. And then you wonder, why do you keep landing in the same space time and again?
So I'm going to use a sailing analogy. Little odd, I understand, but I think appropriate. I've been a captain for a long time, and I've sailed almost all around the world. I still have the Mediterranean. Good wishes there. And there are many steps you take before you leave the dock. First, you got to set a goal. You have to pick a destination before you leave the dock, just like setting a target before starting a project. Safety checks. Is the boat ready for the journey? By the way, this list is exhaustive. Are you prepared to complete the project? And do you have the right tools? Checking the weather. You look at the sky and the sea before you go. Hopefully, you listen to the weather radio, similar to spotting risk and problems early. And then you adjust the sails. The wind will shift, so you must turn the wheel, adjust your sails, and stay on track, just like changing your steps when plans go wrong. Preparation ensures success. I think we all know that. Before we talk through them, I want to draw your attention to the second half of that title. The operative part is simple. Before anyone notices, none of these 5 announce themselves. None of them show up in a weekly status report. They don't necessarily produce an incident. They might produce a number that looks a little softer than expected, usually with an explanation that sounds reasonable. By the time you realize you're not going to meet your objective, it's likely too late to even affect it. You get caught in the storm. As we walk through these slides, I would genuinely ask you to keep score. Be honest about it. In our experience, most programs carry at least 3 of the 5. Let's start with the first, which is both the most common and the most underestimated.
I think all of us know this already, but let's just say it aloud. The quality of the data is the most important success driver in a retrieval program. If the data were perfect, we won't need half the work we do. But the fact of the matter is, it never is. Why? Well, to start with, claims data was not built for retrieval. It was built for adjudication and payment, right? These two are, retrieval really needs to know where the chart is physically. And these two are very different problems to solve, adjudication and retrieval. So claims data was not even built for it. And then billing entity on the claims is not the site of service. You get a health system central billing office, but the chart is sitting 40 miles. Sorry? Yeah, the chart is sitting 40 miles away from the.
Is there a question?
All right, thank you. So we're talking about claims data was not built for retrieval, right? And then there are obvious data discrepancies, right? NPI on a claim may be group NPI. And as a result, the provider location is actually logbox. Good luck chasing data from there, right? Contact demographics are populated when the contract was built. Providers move, practice get acquired. As a result, system has no reason to touch the data. And when it comes to you, you should be aware. You got to be aware of it. Then there are operational issues with contact information, rendering versus billing provider, all that good stuff. Now the thing is. And as a result, when you have that challenge, you would be calling somebody who's not been there for the last 5 years. Good luck again, right? No, none of this was anybody's fault. The point is not that some people are not doing the job. The problem is all of this is structural, right? And it is not a question of effort. People are trying to make phone calls, and you end up with a result of let's say 70, 72%, 74%, right? And you'll think it's a program result. I'm sorry, it's not program results. It is a data results. The program had no chance because data is faulty. Even before the first call was dialed, it was never going to be successful, period.
Before anyone or any outreach begins, the full file has to be analyzed. Every record should be checked for a number of things. For example, a usable fax number, phone number, address, appropriate MPI. Next step is you go through a complete data and address normalization, followed by a multi-source crosswalk that goes beyond the MPI registry. MPPS is a self-reported and often stale data set. It tells you what a provider registered in the past, not necessarily where the chart is today. Provider to facility linkages should be corrected against known good data. Most importantly, everything learned during the cycle, every corrected address, validated fax, confirmed provider contact should be fed back into a provider database. And this is critical. And this is probably one of the biggest misses I see in the industry. If you do this correctly, the file in cycle 2 is materially better than the file in cycle 1. And that might just be from an MA project to a HEDIS project. We're using the word cycle just as a project. This asset compounds. Every piece of information captured becomes more valuable with each project cycle. That is the difference between a vendor and a partner. It's also the difference in your own organization and its preparation.
I think second critical track is the process. And mostly the challenge is absence of an integrated, interconnected process design. To start with, a good process design assumes data is not perfect. So it has checks and balances built in. It has dashboards that report it, then they surface them at the right time. Of course, there's more to process design. Now there are these outreach teams, ground teams trying to chase data, there's remote data download, and there's escalation team, right? All of these are trying to work, but the problem here is lack of a shared data vision. Other challenges we have seen is lack of strategy of linking a provider type or a provider to what channel you're going to use. Let's face it, right? A standalone provider office, which is able to and will respond to fax in 48 hours is very, very different from a large health systems, which has got in-house ROI teams or, they partner with a national team. These two are very, very different channels, and you have to understand it while you're designing a process and not react to it. Third is, which all of us dread, there's going to be scope change. There will be additional members, revised change file because of some error, or a change submission date. Now, these are legitimate problems, have their own reasons for doing that. They're not trying to create trouble for you. But in piecemeal program, where you're reacting to it, you just get shocked about it. As against a well-designed program, where here is how we're going to respond to it. So broken process is not where people are not doing the job. Don't get me wrong there. People are working, but there's no interconnection between these two. That's the challenge. That's the definition of broken process to me, right? And as a result, this is a program which is permanently playing catch up. Here's a pattern I'm sure all of you recognize. I'm sure it's going to find. You start discovering it. Let's say it's a 10 weeks program, and 7th week you realize there's a ROI gated site. It needs 45 days to refill. You're not going to get data. Even if you get the data for retrieval date, it's going to be too late, right? Or a provider gap that only accepts requests from portal, but guess what? Nobody's got credentials for it. And then facility requires to sign authorization forms. Nobody's aware of it. All these problems are solvable. None of this is non-solvable. But the question is, when do you come to know about it and when do you start working on it?
The alternative in designing is designing the interconnections deliberately. You have to do this first before you do anything else. Specialized teams for every queue and phase, because portal retrieval and on-site scanning and copy service coordination are genuinely different. The same staff is not interchangeable. That is when a project starts failing. Human capital becomes overwhelmed. Daily and weekly monitoring and corrective action and escalations built into the operating cadence, not triggered by a bad monthly number or a bad weekly report. You cannot wait for bad to happen. The hardest records, the provider-gated sites, the portal-only groups, on-site only, the legacy systems, paper offices, these have to be identified early and sequenced on day one. So the long lead items start their clock in week 1 rather than being discovered in week 6. This is the advantage of experience and having historical data stored year after year. In conclusion, a well-architected program does not fail, it adapts. A reactive program does the opposite. and is handcuffed by time because it is not predictive in nature. Reactive program runs beautifully until the week it doesn't. And then there's no runway left to fix anything. And we've all been there. Everything's looking great. And then it all stalls. And you got 3 weeks left. And you're trying to move the needle. And you can't. You're stuck. You're stuck at 75, 76, 77, somewhere in there. Typically is the number we see.
The third critical track we talked about data, we talked about process, but the third critical track is just the nature of the ecosystem, right? There's not much you can change about it. Retrieval does not happen in a closed system. Your success depends on number of other stakeholders, copy services, large health systems, their offices, individual provider offices. Now, these are people with their own priorities. Hospitals not sitting here to give you records, right? They have their own queue. And frankly, sometimes there's no contractual obligation to your deadline. Your deadline is your problem and you have to work for it. I mean, all of us are aware that, large health systems either route most of the record ROI release of information requests either through their own teams, they have in-house teams, or they partner with a national provider. And most of these guys have a 30 to 45 days turnaround time, and you have got to take them into account. The other piece, which I dare say gets undermined, is the invoice process. Every provider's process office, right, has their own way they want to handle payments. They have their own forms, they have their own payment terms, how much they want, how they want to get paid. There are still people who want check. There are people who will let you do online payment, stuff like that, right? And again, a good program will have all of this built into account. Let's say some systems are asking for much more payment. So you have to lock in step with your plan and say, hey, here is what I've already done, and here is what I need your approval for. Here is what you're going to always. So basically, this process has to be mapped out well in advance, as I can say, hey, what happened here? Third thing is, which all of us are aware of, provider churn is a fact. It's going to happen. Practices will get acquired. Physicians will move. Groups consolidate, right? Now, none of this is anybody's fault, but the fact of the matter is you have got to have a plan to deal with all of this.
So what can you do about an ecosystem you do not control? Well, I think the first thing is stop treating it like weather and start treating it like terrain. Map it in advance and plan your route around it. The more data you have and the longer history you have, the more your ability to do that. Build initiative-taking partnerships before the project begins. Establish standing relationships with copy services, major facilities, anyone in your footprint that represents a large percentage of the population you're trying to capture. You need to be a known counterparty with a clear process. You don't want to be the unfamiliar facts that's buried in a queue of hundreds, because we all know where that leads. You need to agree on templates. You need to agree on limits, authorization formats up front, so exceptions become rare rather than the routine. And beneath all of this, maintain a provider database continuously. And I know I've been beating this to death. I can't explain how important this is, instead of rebuilding it each cycle. So churn is absorbed as it happens rather than rediscovered on every project. Honestly, you can't control the ecosystem, just like the ocean, but you can navigate around the storm and predict them, which allows you to figure out what contacts are current, what sites are gated, why they're gated, what queues are slow, and then you rely on your relationships so that you can call on them through a project. That's an asset that takes years to build, and that it can't be improvised. It doesn't fall in a 9-week window. That's why this critical track punishes new entrances and rewards continuity. It's not clever. It's just accumulated knowledge.
I think we talked about ecosystem which is not out of control. But now let's talk about the most important elements, in my opinion, which can actually control, right? The transparency and the reporting, the absolute need to know where things are, right? Now, what happens? So a lot of times retrieval programs tend to work in a black box, right? There are modules, there is outreach team module, there is an invoicing module, there is on-field module. but essentially every module is working on its own in a fragmented manner. And then there are reports, right? Now, let's say everybody has a weekly report, right? That's not a secret. That's not even, it's not even table stake. Like you start with that, right? But the problem is, how is that weekly report built? Is it integrated view, or let's say talk about issue, but the issue was captured 3 days after it was reported. Then it goes to the, in so-called weekly call. And by the time it reaches to the decision provider, you're already 2 weeks behind. And as a result, either the damage is done or you're reacting to what you're supposed to do lately. Most of these systems were built in an era which was not AI, where there was no cloud. And as a result, you're constantly struggling. What do I keep or already have? What I should not. But the fact of the matter is, my friends, need of the hour is real-time reporting, which is able to get information, asynchronous information to the people who matter at a time which matters. And it's not that easy. That's the big challenge. Now, what happens is the crux of all of this, and the subtler issue I'm going to really trying to hint out is the reporting will say the temperature is 68 degree. What is 68 degree? How, it doesn't help me. It doesn't tell me where the fire is. It doesn't tell me which provider needs help. It doesn't tell me provider needs what help. So unless you could have a macro level reporting, which is doing reporting for the sake of it, but not really getting to specific points, specific provider offices, specific challenge, and the result, I'm afraid it's useless.
What a modern retrieval program requires. It requires real-time visibility, and it requires it at the provider level, not a weekly summary of the retrieval rate. That's only part of the view. A live view where every chart is, what channel it's in, what's blocking it, how long it's been blocked, and what needs to happen next. By provider, by channel. And remember, you or your vendor may be better suited to capture a record. Know both sides, relationships and capabilities. Escalation either way doesn't mean someone failed. It means partnership. Be prepared. Appropriate dashboards built for real-time visibility on the daily cadence provide some visibility. Communication is just as important. What you're looking at and hearing and communicating in combination further success. Managing a project correctly reflects what's happening now, not what happened last week. And I'm going to bring this point up again because I think it's really important. Partnership is paramount. It provides integration rather than a fragmented approach. Business and technology on the same iterative cadence. So when the operating reality shifts mid-project, the tooling moves with it rather than becoming a constraint. The test we'd offer is simple, and it's worth applying to your current projects. Can you, at this moment, see how many of your charts are sitting in a queue? Can you see what queue they're in? Do you know what the potential impact of that chart is? A lot of people that just work in the retrieval industry don't understand how a chart file is actually built. Every chart isn't equal. So having that relationship internal to your organization is also important because you need to know what is the most important thing for me to chase. Why and how long they've been there. If the answer is no, or maybe, you're not managing a retrieval program. This is a reactive versus proactive mindset. Know the blockers. This is really, really the difference between 75 and 90%.
I think we are into last mile execution. We talked about, how critical what's the dollar amount. We talked about what drives it. We talked about, data, process design gap, both the gaps and how can we solve it, right? We talked about all of this, right? Now it just comes down to execution. And I thought I'll introduce somebody, who has been dealing with this, who has dealt with millions of charts, who handles our offshore operation. Suro, I think it's best if you talk about what kind of challenge you see day-to-day basis and really get into details of it.
Thank you, Vikas. Well, the fifth failure mode is the one that undoes all the others if it isn't right, which is the execution, the last mile. Well, you can have a clean chase file, an architected process, strong ecosystem relationships, real-time dashboards, and still land at 76% retrieval. because in the end, retrieval is thousands of small human interactions, and the quality of those interactions is not a strategic question. It's an operations discipline question. So let's talk about the challenges. Number one, coordination between multiple teams and people. Provider relationships that are tricky but critical. And the volume and the complexity of dynamic data, calls, phone numbers, notes, etc. Let's do some unpacking of the third one because it sounds mundane and it's completely determinative. A single project generates enormous volume of operational microdata. Every call attempt, every number tried, every single voicemail, every note from a practice manager saying, quote unquote, call me back after the 15th, every single escalation, every partial fulfillment. Now, multiply that across a full chase, and you have a data management problem hiding inside what looks like a phone calling problem. If that data isn't captured rigorously, the next agent who touches the record starts from zero, redials the same number that's already failed, reasks the same question that's already answered, and burns the provider's patience for nothing. Now, which brings me to the most important aspect, which is provider abrasion. And this is where the last mile has consequences well beyond your retrieval rate. Provider offices are most of the times, infinitely patient. Are not infinitely patient. They're most of the times understaffed. They're getting requests from a risk team. They're getting requests from a HEDIS team and possibly an audit team. And those requests can, most of the times happen in the same week and sometimes within the same for the same chart. So every clumsy interaction spends almost a good amount of relationship capital that you will need in the next cycle of your project and that your network team may need for something else entirely. So according to me, a good program that hits its numbers by burning down provider abrasion hasn't really succeeded.
Thank you. So what does good look like? We always ask ourselves this question. Honestly, it's unfashionable. It's not sexy, but it's doable. Have a plan, monitor that plan, foresee and adapt to changes, and prioritize your opportunities. It's ongoing communication, structured training between teams, data management, and communication. You should be able to ask multiple team members, if not every team member, about a provider situation and get the same answer. We have to be on the same page. And that goes, it's also a provider relationship issue. I think sometimes we get focused on different things. It's rigorous quality checks, live call monitoring with feedback loops, review of cadence that holds from day one through the final day of the project. I know we've come back to this a few times, but it's critical that you don't stop. It sounds obvious, but it's where most projects quietly slip because discipline decays, under deadline pressure, exactly when it matters most. Spot your opportunities and lean on relationship management. It's critical. That's it. And it's pardon me, precisely because it isn't clever that most programs underinvest in it, and precisely why it's where projects are actually won or lost. So what changes with the right program? Well, this is a question we ask ourselves a lot, and as technology evolves, we all have to adapt, but I think it still falls into 4 categories. Partnership, working together to accomplish the same goal. Preparedness, everything from data to relationship management is shipshape. You have to be prepared in advance. It's very hard to midway projects start to fixing those types of issues. Execution, have a plan, work the plan, and be prepared to navigate to get to a solution. And then close. Work a project till the end. It can make a big difference. I can't tell you guys how many times I've seen a project with 2 weeks left at 78% and it gets to 90. Because we focus, we work together, and we accomplish it. You don't give up. The outcomes above 90% retrieval rate with low provider abrasion. That's your goal. And I want to
And by the way, these are real
attention.
numbers. sorry to interrupt, Michael. These are real numbers. This is something which we have done. And that's why we're able to sort of distill all the approach we have. So it, not every program will get it, but there is a huge change if we do all things right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a case study in the deck where I think the final outcome, and this was an ACA project recently where we hit 91.7% and very, very low provider abrasion. I recall we only had 4 or 5 complaints. So that's a high number. Anyone can push a rate up by burning down provider relationships, by hammering offices, escalating aggressively, and spending goodwill you'll need on your next project. More importantly, the overall reputation of your organization and any organization you might be supporting can be damaged. Above 90% with low abrasion is fundamentally different claim, and it's a hard one. Now, if we put that against the model from earlier, the gap between a typical 75% and 91% retrieval rate on a 60,000 chart project is roughly 9,600 charts. Run those through the same math, the HEDIS they carry, the RAF they represent, and you're going to find an 8-figure number. And I know we talked about that a little bit, but it becomes, and when I say 8-figure, I mean 8 million. It becomes really significant very quickly. This is the entire argument we've been building towards for the last 40 minutes. This gap is not an effort problem. And it was never going to be solved by pushing a vendor harder. It's structural. This is good news because structural problems have structural solutions, and you can start diagnosing those today.
I think we have talked about a lot of things in last 35 odd minutes. What we have done is let's get down to some action now, right? If you will. What we have done is we're taking the liberty of putting together a very simple 10 questions, 10 minutes questionnaire. If you will please be kind enough to drop your email ID in the chat box somewhere, we will email this template, this questionnaire to you, right? Feel free to score yourself, right? Idea is not to find out gaps. This idea is to give you specific information on where you are. And if you guys feel need to talk to us, we'll be more than happy to get on a call with you about it. But yeah, I would really request you to send your email so that we can email this questionnaire to you. Yeah, next slide, Ashu. Thank you. Thank you so much. We really, really enjoyed our conversation, not just this session, but when we were preparing for it, when we were discussing the 5 tracks which you saw have actually come out of lots of brainstorming among all of us, right? But there are 3 key messages I really want to share with all of you guys. First of all, the gap is real and there is a dollar figure to it. That dollar I talked about, you could be sitting anywhere in that curve. The gap is real, and it's there is a cost to it. Second, it's structural. It's not about people not trying hard enough. Everybody's trying very, very hard to get the charts home, but there are reasons which you can plan for and fix it. It's very, very fixable. Now you can already see the contact information. My contact, my phone number, my email ID, Michael's. Either of us, both of us would love to just have a conversation. Suro can always join. But I just want to take a really pause here and would love to address questions you guys have. Challenge any of the ideas we have. That would be even better. Push us higher. But I'm just taking a pause here. Really would love to handle questions.
I'll jump in if I may. The retrieval score document that you had in the previous slide, is that something that you all might be interested in potentially including in your presentation, just for the folks that perhaps missed this? It might be of value to some people that maybe weren't able to attend today. I don't want to put you on the spot, so maybe think about it and you can let us know.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah, and it looks like we actually have a question in the chat box, and I'll jump in, Brittany, and kind of read that aloud. So the question is, how are you keeping retrieval that high without providers getting annoyed? Feels like those two usually fight each other.
Michael
Yeah.
will take that.
Oh, you gonna leave that one to me? Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a very valid question, and I think it lends itself to how well your process is architected. If you're calling a provider 12 times and asking the same questions every time, they're gonna get annoyed. And there's going to be provider escalation, there's going to be other things. If you're working with a provider in partnership to complete a goal, then you're going to have a lot more success. So they may say, call back on the 15th. That was an example earlier, correct? So call back on the 15th and know exactly what you're going to say. But if that message gets lost in your systems or in translation or whatever the case may be, that's where provider abrasion comes from. So you really do have to be on top of it. The other piece, I think a lot of people miss is the relationship building part of these points of contact. Like, get to know them. They're quick conversations, but you can say, hello, how are you doing? Are you having a good day? Simple things like that. Little gestures go a long way. So that's another big piece to this. Stay tight on your data and really, really, really work on that relationship. And over years, and I talked about this earlier, you can call them and say, hey, I really need a favor. We got this, Chase, last second. Can you please help us out? I know it's probably deep in your queue. Those are the types of things that become paramount to success.
And I think if I may add to what Michael just said, Michael has mentioned a lot of good points, right? And this is where the training piece also comes into it, picture, execution piece of it. We have trained our team to spot trouble earlier. If you can sense that this provider is not being called, we very quickly escalate and lob the ball over to either somebody senior in the team or sometimes a plan and say, hey, I don't think this guy likes us calling so many times or whatever. Just don't keep doing the same thing again and again, thinking that if you call enough number of times, he's going to get frustrated and give you charts. Doesn't work, I'm afraid. But yeah, I would say that really matters.
Good. It looks like we've got one more question that was dropped in the chat. The question reads, does chart chasing differ when it's done for risk versus quality?
Fundamentally, no, but you're chasing a measure. You're not chasing typically a data service. Sometimes it's certain aspects of a chart for a lengthy data service. I think you need to understand what you're asking for, and this really becomes an education issue for whomever's dialing on your behalf. Fundamentally, the process is the same, but there's a lot of context within it that is different. So I think that's really the answer. Do you know what
Praveen, the question is not really whether it differs. The question is, do you know this is different? That is extremely critical, right? That ability to pass on that precise information to the team on the ground is very, very critical, as against just the very nature of it.
Yeah, it's different. It's a different request. Fundamentally the same process, different request. And I think to Vikas's point, there's an educational arm to this that's really required to be successful. Does that help? Somebody else has got to have a question. Come on, guys. And back to that question, I was just thinking about it a little bit more. Timing is very different. Like if you're running a HEDIS project versus an MA project, HEDIS is quick. If you're lucky, you get a chase file by mid-February, and it's got to be done by April. You don't have a lot of time. MA, you have more time to kind of solve some of these issues. So planning on the front end of the quality project is critical.
Any other questions? All right, then I mean, at least as I said, all of us really enjoyed preparing for this and having this conversation. Thank you so much for your time, and we hope
Yep.
to see you either on some other call or it's a small world. We hope to run into each other and have a deeper conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for your time.